The train whistle screamed through the Oklahoma territory like a dying animal, and Katherine Eleanor was certain her heart made the exact same sound as she pressed her tear-stained face against the window, watching Boston disappear behind her with every clacking rotation of the iron wheels. Katherine had boarded that train 3 days ago, wearing a traveling dress of deep green silk, her auburn hair pinned in an elaborate style her mother had insisted upon that final morning, and a heart so shattered she wondered if the pieces might actually fall from her chest and scatter across the platform. Robert had promised her everything: a wedding in the spring of 1885, a brownstone near Beacon Hill, children who would attend the finest schools, a life wrapped in the comfortable predictability of Boston society. Instead, she had discovered him in the parlor with Margaret Whitmore, her own cousin, their lips pressed together in a kiss that had torn Katherine's world apart like paper. Her father had been sympathetic but firm. The scandal would ruin them all if she stayed. His sister, Katherine's Aunt Louise, had written from Guthrie in the Oklahoma territory about opportunities and fresh starts. The letter had arrived like divine intervention, or perhaps damnation. Katherine was not yet sure which. Within a week, her trunks were packed, her ticket purchased, and she was moving west toward a life she could not begin to imagine, leaving behind everything she had ever known. The Oklahoma landscape stretched endlessly outside her window now, so different from the neat brick buildings and manicured parks of Boston. Rolling grasslands extended toward horizons that seemed impossibly distant, dotted with clusters of trees along creek beds and the occasional rough wooden structure. The sky was bigger here, overwhelmingly vast, and Katherine felt herself shrinking beneath its weight. She was 22 years old, unmarried and disgraced, traveling alone toward an uncertain future in a territorial town she had only read about in newspapers. The tears came again, hot and bitter, and she let them fall freely since there was no one in her private compartment to witness her despair. Guthrie, Oklahoma territory appeared suddenly as the train rounded a bend, and Katherine's breath caught despite her misery. The town sprawled across the prairie in a way that seemed both organized and chaotic, with wide dirt streets lined with wooden buildings that looked hastily constructed, yet somehow permanent. She could see a large brick structure that might be a courthouse or government building, several two-story establishments with painted signs she could not yet read, and dozens of smaller buildings extending in every direction. Horses and wagons moved along the streets, and people walked the wooden sidewalks in clothing that looked decidedly more practical than anything in her trunks. The train began to slow, brakes squealing, and Katherine quickly wiped her face with her handkerchief, trying to compose herself. Her reflection in the window showed red-rimmed eyes and a pale complexion, her carefully pinned hair now slightly disheveled from 3 days of travel. She looked exactly like what she was, a heartbroken woman fleeing scandal, and the thought brought fresh tears that she angrily blinked away. She would not arrive in Guthrie weeping like a child. She would hold her head high, greet her aunt with dignity, and somehow build a new life from the ruins of her old one. The platform appeared outside her window, crowded with people waiting to board or greet arriving passengers. Katherine gathered her small traveling bag, smoothed her wrinkled dress, and stood on trembling legs as the train lurched to a complete stop. The conductor appeared at her compartment door, tipping his hat as he informed her they had arrived. She thanked him quietly and stepped into the narrow corridor, following other passengers toward the exit. The late afternoon sun hit her face like a physical force as she descended the metal steps to the platform. The air was different here, drier and carrying unfamiliar scents of dust and prairie grass, and something else she could not identify. The platform bustled with activity, voices calling out greetings and farewells, porters hauling luggage, vendors selling refreshments to boarding passengers. Katherine stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the noise and movement and the terrible reality that she was actually here, hundreds of miles from home, in a place as foreign to her as the moon. Katherine Eleanor. A woman's voice cut through the chaos, and Katherine turned to see Aunt Louise pushing through the crowd. Her father's sister was a tall woman in her 50s, dressed in a simple brown dress and sensible boots, her graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. She had left Boston 15 years ago after her husband died, seeking adventure and independence in the developing territories, and her letters home had always carried a tone of satisfaction that had baffled Katherine's mother. Now, seeing the confident way she moved through the crowd, Katherine glimpsed what had drawn her Aunt West. "Aunt Louise," Katherine managed, her voice breaking despite her best intentions. Her aunt's arms came around her immediately, strong and warm, and Katherine felt her carefully constructed composure crumble completely. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks as she clung to her aunt on that dusty platform, surrounded by strangers in a strange land. "There now, child," Louise murmured, patting her back. "You have come a long way and you are exhausted. Let us get your trunks and go home. Everything will look better after some rest and a proper meal." Katherine wanted to believe her, but as she stood there weeping in her aunt's embrace, she could not imagine anything ever feeling better again. A porter approached about her luggage, and Louise handled the arrangements with efficient competence while Katherine tried to pull herself together. She was aware of people glancing at her, this overdressed Eastern woman crying on the platform, and shame burned hot in her chest. "The wagon is just there," Louise said gently, guiding Katherine by the elbow. "It is not far." They moved through the crowd toward a sturdy wagon hitched to two brown horses. Louise's driver, an older gentleman she introduced as Mr. Peterson, began loading Katherine's trunks into the back while Louise helped her onto the wooden seat. The rough boards and simple construction were nothing like the cushioned carriages Katherine was accustomed to, but she was too exhausted to care. She settled onto the hard seat, clutching her traveling bag in her lap like a shield. The ride through Guthrie streets would have fascinated Katherine under different circumstances. The town had been founded only 6 years ago during the land run of 1889, and Louise pointed out buildings and businesses with obvious pride as they passed. There was the newspaper office, the general store, a hotel that looked surprisingly grand, a schoolhouse, several saloons, a church with a white steeple reaching toward that enormous sky. People called out greetings to Louise, who seemed to know everyone, and curious eyes tracked Katherine with obvious interest. "The town is still growing every day," Louise explained as they turned onto a quieter street lined with houses. "When I arrived 5 years ago, there was half this much." People come from all over, seeking land and opportunity. It is rough in some ways, certainly not Boston, but there is an energy here, Katherine, a sense that we are building something new. Katherine nodded mutely, unable to share her aunt's enthusiasm. Boston had been perfectly fine. Thank you very much. She had not needed something new. She had wanted something old and established and safe, a life of predictable social calls and charity committees and eventually children who would have their father's eyes. Instead she had this: dust and prairie and strangers staring at her like she was some exotic creature from the East. Louise's house was a neat wooden structure painted white, with a front porch and shuttered windows and a small garden protected by a white picket fence. It looked cheerful and welcoming in the late afternoon light, but Katherine felt only a hollow ache as they pulled to a stop in front. This was her home now. This house in this strange town in this vast territory, so far from everything she knew. Mr. Peterson helped unload her trunks while Louise showed Katherine inside. The house was simply furnished but clean and comfortable, with braided rugs on the wooden floors and curtains at the windows. Louise led her upstairs to a small bedroom with a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window overlooking the garden. Katherine's trunks were brought up and placed at the foot of the bed, and then Louise shooed Mr. Peterson away and closed the door, leaving them alone. "I know this is difficult," Louise said quietly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Your father explained what happened in his letter. I am so sorry, Katherine. Robert was a fool, and you deserve far better." The kindness in her aunt's voice undid Katherine completely. She sank onto the bed beside Louise and wept as she had not allowed herself to weep even once during the 3-day journey. Great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in her chest, releasing all the pain and betrayal and fear she had been holding back. Louise simply held her, offering no platitudes, just steady presence until the storm passed. "What am I going to do?" Katherine finally whispered, her voice raw. "I do not know how to live here. I do not know how to be anyone other than who I was in Boston, and that person is gone." "Then you will discover who you can be here," Louise said firmly. "It will take time and it will not be easy, but Katherine, you are stronger than you know. You got on that train alone. You traveled hundreds of miles to a place you had never seen. That takes courage." "It takes desperation," Katherine corrected bitterly. "Sometimes those are the same thing," Louise replied. "Now wash your face and rest for a bit. I will prepare dinner and we will talk more tonight. Tomorrow I will show you the town properly and we will begin figuring out your future. But for now, just rest." Louise left, closing the door softly behind her. Katherine sat on the bed for a long moment, staring at her trunks full of silk dresses and leather boots and all the accoutrements of her former life. Then she rose, poured water from the pitcher into the basin, and scrubbed her face clean of tears and train dust. Her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand showed a woman she barely recognized, pale and hollow-eyed, her hair a disaster. She began removing pins, letting the auburn mass fall around her shoulders, and wondered who she might become in this place where no one knew Miss Katherine Eleanor of Beacon Hill. That first evening passed in a blur of exhaustion. Louise prepared a simple but delicious meal of roasted chicken and vegetables from her garden, and they ate at the small kitchen table while Louise talked about Guthrie and the people Katherine would meet, and the opportunities that might be available. Katherine heard the words without really absorbing them, too tired to think beyond the immediate moment. After dinner, she helped wash dishes, then climbed the stairs to her new room and collapsed into bed without even changing into her nightgown. Sleep claimed her immediately, deep and dreamless. She woke to bright sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of unfamiliar birds calling outside. For one disoriented moment, she expected to see her familiar bedroom in Boston, but the rough, wooden walls and simple furnishings quickly reminded her where she was. Oklahoma Territory. Guthrie. Her new life. The ache in her chest returned immediately, but it felt slightly less sharp than the day before, as if her body was already beginning to accept what her heart still rejected. Louise had laid out a pitcher of fresh water and clean towels, and Katherine took her time washing and dressing. She chose one of her simpler dresses, a blue cotton that would not look too ostentatious, and braided her hair in a single plait down her back. The face that looked back at her from the mirror appeared more rested, though sadness still lingered in her green eyes. Downstairs, Louise was cooking breakfast, and wonderful smells filled the kitchen. "Good morning," her aunt said cheerfully. I hope you slept well. Sit down, this is almost ready." They ate together at the kitchen table. Eggs and bacon and fresh bread with butter, and Catherine found her appetite returning despite everything. Louise talked about her plans for the day, which included introducing Catherine around town and stopping by the schoolhouse where Louise taught music twice a week. "You play piano beautifully," Louise said. "Miss Sarah, who runs the school, has been wanting someone to help with music lessons. The children here are hungry to learn everything, and there are not enough teachers for all the subjects we would like to offer." "I do not know if I am qualified to teach," Catherine began, but Louise waved her hand dismissively. "You know more than these children do, and that is qualification enough. Besides, it would give you something to do, a way to meet people and feel useful. Teaching has saved me, Catherine. I was so lost after your Uncle James died, and coming here and working with these children has given me purpose again." Catherine had never considered teaching, but she supposed it made more sense than anything else. She could hardly return to the sort of idle social life she had led in Boston. There were no afternoon teas to attend here, no charity galas to organize, no carefully orchestrated social calendar to fill her days. She would need something to occupy her time and mind, or she would go mad dwelling on what she had lost. After breakfast, they walked into town together. The morning air was crisp and pleasant, not yet carrying the heat Louise warned would come later in the day. The streets were already busy with activity, wagons rolling past, horses tied at hitching posts, people going about their business. Catherine was acutely aware of the curious glances directed at her, the way conversations paused as they passed. She held her head high, trying to project a confidence she did not feel. Louise stopped frequently to introduce Catherine to merchants and neighbors, and Catherine struggled to remember all the names and faces. Mr. Harrison at the general store, who had a kind smile and a thick beard. Mrs. Chen, who ran a laundry service and spoke with an accent Catherine had never heard before. The Johnsons, who owned the hotel and seemed to know everyone's business. The Reverend Mitchell at the church, who pressed her hand warmly and invited her to Sunday services. So many new people, all friendly but all strangers, and Catherine felt overwhelmed by the end of the first hour. They were walking past the livery stable when Catherine heard it, a voice that somehow cut through all the noise and activity and reached directly into her chest. "Easy now, easy. I know it hurts, but I need to check it. Easy, girl." Catherine turned without thinking toward the source of the voice and saw him for the first time. He was crouched beside a large bay horse in the stable's open doorway, his hands gentle on the animal's injured leg, his voice a low murmur of reassurance. He wore dusty work clothes, a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing strong forearms, worn trousers, scuffed boots. A hat lay on the ground beside him, and his hair was dark and slightly too long, curling at his collar. She could not see his face from this angle, but something about the careful way he handled the nervous horse made her pause. "That is Ethan Quincy," Louise said, following Catherine's gaze. "He has the ranch about 3 miles north of town. Good man, keeps to himself mostly. Lost his parents to fever about 8 years back, has been running that place alone ever since." As if he sensed their attention, Ethan Quincy looked up, and Catherine found herself staring into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. They were the color of deep water, startling against his sun-browned skin, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. He held her gaze for what felt like forever but could only have been seconds, and Catherine saw something flicker across his face, surprise perhaps, or recognition, though they had never met. Then a man emerged from inside the stable, breaking the moment, and Ethan turned his attention back to the horse. Katherine realized she had stopped walking and Louise was watching her with interest. "Come on," her aunt said gently. "The schoolhouse is just ahead." Katherine followed, but she found herself glancing back over her shoulder once, catching a glimpse of Ethan Quincy standing now, his hand on the horse's neck, before the stable disappeared from view behind a building. The schoolhouse was a long wooden structure with windows along both sides and a small bell tower on top. Inside, it was a single large room with rows of desks, a blackboard at the front, and a worn piano in the corner. Miss Sarah Turner, the teacher, was a woman in her 40s with intelligent brown eyes and a warm manner. She greeted Katherine enthusiastically and immediately began discussing the possibility of music lessons. "The children would be so thrilled," Sarah said. "Most of them have never had any formal music education. If you could even just teach them some basic songs and theory, it would be wonderful." Katherine found herself agreeing, partly because both women were looking at her so hopefully and partly because she genuinely did not have anything else to do. They arranged for her to come 3 afternoons a week to start, and Katherine left the schoolhouse feeling slightly more purposeful than she had since leaving Boston. The rest of the day passed in a continued whirlwind of introductions and information. Louise showed her the library, a small room above the general store filled with donated books. They visited the church, which was simple but lovely inside with wooden pews and colored glass in the windows. They stopped at the dressmaker's shop, where a cheerful woman named Mrs. Davis exclaimed over Katherine's traveling dress and offered to make her some more practical clothing suitable for Oklahoma weather. By the time they returned home that evening, Katherine's head was spinning with names and places and the overwhelming newness of everything. She helped Louise prepare dinner, and they ate quietly, Katherine too tired for much conversation. After cleaning up, she climbed the stairs to her room and stood at the window, looking out over the unfamiliar landscape. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and orange that were almost painfully beautiful. Boston's sunsets had been pretty enough, visible between buildings if you knew where to look, but this was something else entirely. The vastness of the sky, the endless horizon, the play of light across the prairie made her feel both insignificant and somehow part of something larger than herself. She thought about Ethan Quincy, those blue eyes that had met her so briefly, and wondered why he had stuck in her mind when she had met dozens of people that day. Something about the gentleness in his hands on that injured horse, perhaps. Or the loneliness she thought she had glimpsed in his face, a mirror of her own. The days that followed settled into a routine. Katherine spent her mornings helping Louise with household tasks, learning to cook meals that were simpler than what their cook in Boston had prepared, but somehow more satisfying. She wrote letters to her father, carefully cheerful accounts of her new life that mentioned nothing of her heartache or homesickness. In the afternoons, she went to the schoolhouse and worked with the children on music. The students ranged in age from 6 to 14, a diverse group that included farmers' children, merchants' sons and daughters, and even a few children from families that had recently immigrated from other countries. They were universally enthusiastic, if not particularly talented, and Katherine found herself enjoying the work despite her initial reservations. There was something healing about focusing on their progress, about teaching them to match pitch and read basic notation and sing simple rounds. Their excitement over small achievements touched something in her that had felt frozen since that terrible day in Boston. 3 weeks after her arrival, Katherine was walking home from the schoolhouse when she heard raised voices from the livery stable. She recognized Ethan Quincy's voice immediately, though she had not seen him since that first day, and curiosity drew her closer. "I am telling you, Bill, that shoe is not fitted right," Ethan was saying, frustration clear in his tone. "I can fix it myself if you are too busy." Too busy. Another voice, older and belligerent, responded. "I have been shoeing horses since before you were born, boy. I know what I am doing." "I am not questioning your experience," Ethan said, his voice strained with patience. "I am just saying this particular horse has an unusual gait, and the shoe needs to be adjusted. Look at how she is standing." Katherine paused near the entrance, not wanting to intrude but unable to help listening. Through the open door, she could see Ethan standing beside a gray mare, his hand on the horse's shoulder, while an older man she recognized as the stable owner, Bill Mason, glared at him with arms crossed. "If you are so damned smart, do it yourself then," Bill snapped. "I've got paying customers waiting." "Fine, I will," Ethan replied quietly. "Do you mind if I use your forge?" Bill waved a hand dismissively and stomped off toward the back of the stable. Ethan sighed and began leading the mare toward the forge area, and that was when he noticed Katherine standing in the doorway. His blue eyes widened slightly with recognition. "Madam," he said, touching his hand to his forehead in a polite gesture, though he was not wearing a hat. "Can I help you with something?" Katherine realized she had no legitimate reason to be standing there and felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I apologize. I did not mean to eavesdrop. I was just passing by." "Nothing to apologize for," Ethan said, though his expression remained cautious. Bill does not appreciate criticism, even when it is constructive. But this girl needs her shoe adjusted, or she is going to end up lame. The mare nuzzled at Ethan's shoulder, and he reached up absently to stroke her nose. Katherine found herself moving closer, drawn by something she could not name. "She is beautiful," Katherine said, surprising herself. She had been around horses her whole life, though always as a passenger in carriages or an occasional controlled ride in the park. This mare was different, wilder somehow, despite her obvious trust in Ethan. "She is a good girl," Ethan agreed, his voice softening. "Belonged to my mother. She would be about 15 now, getting up there in years." He paused, then added, "You are Miss Eleanor, right? Louise's niece from Boston." "Katherine," she corrected automatically. "Yes, I arrived a few weeks ago." "I heard," Ethan said. "Small town people talk. They say you are teaching music at the school." Katherine nodded, uncomfortable with the idea that people had been discussing her, though she supposed it was inevitable. "Just a few afternoons a week. Nothing as useful as what you do." "I do not know about that," Ethan said, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Music feeds something in people that they need just as much as anything practical. My mother used to sing while she worked. I still catch myself humming her songs sometimes." There was such sadness in his voice that Katherine felt an unexpected kinship. They were both haunted by loss, she realized, though his was surely more profound than hers. She had lost a future she thought she wanted, but he had lost the people he loved. "I should let you work," Katherine said, suddenly aware that she was lingering. "I did not mean to keep you." "You are not," Ethan said, and there was something in his voice that made her pause. "But I do need to get this shoe fitted before dark. It was nice to properly meet you, Miss Katherine." "Just Katherine," she said again. "And it was nice to meet you as well, Mr. Quincy." "Ethan," he replied, that small half-smile appearing again, "if we are being informal." Katherine found herself smiling back, the first genuine smile she had managed since leaving Boston. "Ethan, then." She left the stable and walked home, but her mind kept drifting back to blue eyes and gentle hands on a horse's injured leg, and a voice that understood about loss and the healing power of music. Next Sunday, Katherine attended church services with Louise as she had every week since arriving. The small church was well attended, families filling the wooden pews while Reverend Mitchell preached about perseverance and faith. Catherine tried to focus on the sermon, but her attention kept wandering to the window where she could see prairie grass waving in the breeze. After the service, people gathered outside to socialize, and Louise introduced Catherine to yet more townspeople. She was speaking with Mrs. Davis, the dressmaker, when she noticed Ethan Quincy standing alone near his wagon, clearly preparing to leave. He wore clean trousers and a white shirt that looked recently pressed, and his dark hair was combed back from his face. He looked younger than she had realized, probably only a few years older than herself, and the loneliness she had sensed before was even more apparent as he stood apart from the conversing groups. Without really thinking about it, Catherine excused herself and walked over to him. He looked up in surprise as she approached. "Good morning," Catherine said. "I did not expect to see you here." "I come most Sundays," Ethan replied. "My mother was religious, and I figure it cannot hurt to keep up the habit, though I usually head out pretty quick after." "I am not much for socializing." "Neither am I, truthfully," Catherine admitted. "Too many new faces, too much small talk about weather and town gossip." "Exactly," Ethan said, and she saw understanding in his eyes. "You want to know about haying schedules and whose daughter is courting whose son, but nobody wants to talk about anything that actually matters." "What matters to you?" Catherine asked, genuinely curious. Ethan seemed taken aback by the question, as if no one had asked him such a thing in a long time. "I do not know," he said slowly. "The ranch, keeping the land my parents worked so hard for. The horses, making sure they are well cared for. Beyond that," he shrugged. "I guess I have not thought much about it. What matters to you?" It was Catherine's turn to be surprised. "I do not know either," she admitted. "Everything I thought mattered turned out not to. Now I am trying to figure out what comes next." "That is honest," Ethan said. "Most people would have given me some polite answer about faith and family." "I am not most people," Catherine said, then immediately regretted how arrogant it sounded. "I mean, I do not see the point in pretending anymore. Pretending did not serve me well in Boston." She had said too much, revealed too much, and she felt her face flush. But Ethan just nodded slowly, his blue eyes serious. "Something bad happened to you back there," he said quietly. It was not a question. "Something that sent you running." "I was not running," Catherine said defensively, then stopped. "Actually, yes, I was. I was absolutely running." "Nothing wrong with that," Ethan said. "Sometimes running is the smartest thing you can do. I have thought about it myself more than once." "Why do you not?" Catherine asked. "Where would I go?" Ethan replied simply. "This is home. Even when it is hard, even when I am lonely enough that the silence feels like it might swallow me whole, this is where I belong." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by his honesty. "I do not know where I belong anymore." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Maybe you belong here. Maybe that is why you came." "I came because I had nowhere else to go," Catherine said, the words bitter. "Or maybe you came because this is where you needed to be," Ethan countered. "My father used to say that sometimes we do not choose our path, it chooses us. We just have to be brave enough to walk it." Before Catherine could respond, Louise called her name, and the moment broke. Ethan touched his hand to his forehead in that same gesture as before, climbed into his wagon, and drove away. Catherine watched him go, her heart beating strangely hard in her chest. That evening, as she and Louise prepared supper, her aunt said casually, "I saw you talking to Ethan Quincy after church." "We were just making conversation," Catherine said, trying to sound unconcerned. "He is a good man," Louise said. "Too alone out there on that ranch. He needs someone, but he is too stubborn or too shy to court anyone properly." Half the unmarried women in town have tried to get his attention over the years, but he keeps to himself. Katherine felt an unexpected flash of jealousy at the thought of other women pursuing Ethan, which was ridiculous. She had known him for all of 10 minutes of actual conversation. Why? Why does he keep to himself? Louise shrugged. Grief, probably. He was only 19 when his parents died, and from what I understand, they were very close. He had to become a man overnight, running that ranch alone, and I think he just forgot how to let people in. Katherine understood that more than she wanted to admit. She had spent the last month keeping people at a distance, going through motions, protecting the bruised parts of herself from any more damage. Maybe she and Ethan Quincy had more in common than she had realized. The weeks passed, and spring deepened into early summer. Katherine settled further into her routine, teaching music 3 days a week and helping Louise with household tasks the rest of the time. She wrote letters home that grew increasingly cheerful as her circumstances became more familiar. She made friends with Sarah Turner from the school and with Mrs. Davis the dressmaker. She learned to bake bread and tend a garden and do a dozen other practical things she had never needed to know in Boston. But through it all, she found herself thinking about Ethan Quincy more than was probably appropriate. She saw him in town occasionally, always polite but distant, and each brief encounter left her wanting more. She learned from Louise's casual mentions that he came into town every Saturday for supplies, that he sold horses to the army fort 50 miles south, that he had a reputation for being able to work with difficult animals that others had given up on. The picture that emerged was of a solitary, hard-working man who poured all his energy into his ranch and had little left over for anything else. One Saturday in June, Katherine was leaving the general store with packages for Louise when she nearly collided with someone on the wooden sidewalk. Strong hands caught her arms, steadying her, and she looked up to find Ethan Quincy holding her, his blue eyes concerned. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I apologize, I was not watching where I was going." "I am fine," Katherine said breathlessly, acutely aware of his hands still on her arms, the warmth of his touch through her dress sleeves. "No harm done." Ethan released her quickly, stepping back, and Katherine felt the loss of contact like a chill. He looked tired, she noticed, with shadows under his eyes and dust covering his clothes. "You look exhausted," she said before she could stop herself. "Are you all right, long week?" Ethan said, attempting a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "We are bringing in new horses from down south, and it has been harder than expected. I probably should have hired help, but I keep thinking I can handle it alone." "Can you?" Katherine asked gently. Ethan's smile turned rueful. "Clearly not as well as I thought. But help costs money, and money has been tight." Katherine understood financial strain from her father's careful budgeting over the years, though she knew his struggles were nothing compared to what Ethan must face running a ranch alone. An idea formed in her mind, impulsive and probably foolish, but she spoke before she could talk herself out of it. "I could help," she said. Ethan stared at her. "What? I could help," Katherine repeated. "I do not know anything about horses or ranching, but I could learn. And you clearly need another pair of hands, even if they are inexperienced." "Katherine, that is generous, but I could not ask you to do that," Ethan said. "It is hard work, dirty work, not anything a lady from Boston would want to be involved in." "You are not asking, I am offering," Katherine countered. "And I am tired of everyone treating me like some delicate flower who will wilt at the first sign of difficulty. I want to do something useful, something real." Ethan studied her face, and Katherine met his gaze steadily, willing him to see that she was serious. Finally, he said slowly, "I have church tomorrow, but I could pick you up after and bring you out to the ranch. You could see what is involved and then decide if you still want to help. Fair enough. Fair enough, Katherine agreed, excitement fluttering in her chest. They parted ways, and Katherine walked home in a daze, wondering what on earth she had just committed herself to. Louise was surprised but supportive when Katherine explained. "It will be good for you," her aunt said. "And good for Ethan, too. That boy needs to learn to accept help." The next day, Katherine dressed in the most practical clothes she owned, a simple brown skirt and white blouse, and waited anxiously after church for Ethan to appear. He arrived in his wagon right on schedule, and she climbed up beside him, trying to ignore the knowing looks from several townspeople who watched them leave together. The ride to Ethan's ranch took about 30 minutes, and Katherine spent the time looking around with interest. The land was beautiful in its starkness, rolling prairie dotted with wildflowers and the occasional tree. The sky stretched overhead in that endless way she was starting to love, and the air smelled of grass and earth and possibility. "There," Ethan said, pointing ahead. "That is home." The ranch appeared gradually, a collection of buildings clustered together in a shallow valley with a creek running through it. The main house was a sturdy wooden structure, not large but well maintained. Near it stood a barn, several corrals with fencing, a couple of smaller outbuildings. Katherine could see horses in the nearest corral, at least a dozen of them, moving restlessly. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop near the barn, and they climbed down. Up close, Katherine could see signs of neglect that distance had hidden. The barn needed fresh paint, the fence in one corral sagged, weeds grew tall in what might have once been a kitchen garden. It was the home of someone stretched too thin, trying to do too much alone. "I know it needs work," Ethan said quietly, following her gaze. "I keep meaning to get to things, but there is always something more urgent." "It is still beautiful," Katherine said honestly. "You have done well keeping it going on your own." Ethan looked surprised by the compliment, then led her toward the corral. "These are the new horses I was telling you about. Wild Mustangs from down south. The Army wants them broke and trained by fall, which gives us about 4 months. I have worked with wild horses before, but never this many at once." The horses in the corral were magnificent, all different colors and sizes but sharing a wildness in their eyes. They shied away as Katherine and Ethan approached the fence, snorting nervously. "They are terrified," Katherine observed. "They have been captured, transported, put in an enclosure for the first time in their lives," Ethan said. "Of course they are terrified. My job is to help them understand they are safe, that humans are not going to hurt them, that we can work together. It takes time and patience." "How do you do it?" Katherine asked, fascinated. "Carefully," Ethan replied with a small smile. "Come on, I will show you." He opened the corral gate and slipped inside, moving slowly and calmly. The horses bunched together at the far side, watching him warily. Ethan did not approach them directly. Instead, he walked around the perimeter, letting them see him, get used to his presence. He talked quietly the whole time, a low murmur that Katherine could not quite make out, but that seemed to soothe the nervous animals. After maybe 10 minutes, one horse, a smaller bay with white socks, took a tentative step toward Ethan. He froze, not looking directly at it, letting the horse make the choice. The bay came closer, stretching its neck to sniff him. Ethan remained perfectly still. Finally, the horse took the last steps and nuzzled at his shoulder. Only then did Ethan raise his hand slowly and touch the horse's neck. Katherine watched, transfixed, as Ethan spent the next half hour with that single horse, gradually running his hands over its body, getting it accustomed to his touch. It was mesmerizing, the care and patience he showed, the gentle persistence. She could see why horses trusted him. There was something deeply calming about his presence, a steadiness that made you feel like everything would be all right. Eventually, Ethan left the corral and rejoined Katherine at the fence. "That is the easy part," he said. "Now comes months of slowly building on that trust, teaching them to accept a halter, then a lead, then a saddle, then a rider. Each step takes time, and you cannot rush it or you will undo all the progress you have made." "It is beautiful," Katherine said softly, "what you do. The way you are with them." Ethan looked embarrassed. "It is just work." "It is more than that," Katherine insisted. "It is a gift." They spent the rest of the afternoon with Ethan showing her around the ranch, explaining what needed to be done daily. Feeding, watering, mucking stalls, checking fences, monitoring the horses for injury or illness. By the time he drove her home that evening, Katherine was exhausted but exhilarated. She had done real physical work, getting her hands and clothes dirty, and it had felt wonderful. "So," Ethan said as they pulled up in front of Louise's house, "do you still want to help, or did I scare you off?" "I will be there next Saturday," Katherine said firmly, "if the offer still stands." "It stands," Ethan said, and the smile he gave her was genuine and warm, lighting up his whole face. "Thank you, Katherine. Truly. I did not realize how much I needed help until you offered it." That night, Katherine lay in bed replaying every moment of the day. The way Ethan's hands had moved over the horse's coat. The sound of his voice, low and soothing, as he talked to the frightened animals. The smile he had given her when she confirmed she would return. She was in dangerous territory, she knew, letting herself care about this lonely cowboy with his broken ranch and his gentle ways. She had sworn she was done with romance, done with trusting her heart to anyone. But something about Ethan Quincy made her want to try again. The next Saturday, Katherine arrived at the ranch wearing an old dress of Louise's that her aunt had assured her could survive hard work. Ethan looked surprised and pleased to see her, and they spent the day working side by side. He taught her how to properly muck stalls, which was exactly as unglamorous as it sounded but somehow satisfying. He showed her how to check the horses' hooves for stones or damage, how to groom them with firm strokes that they seemed to enjoy, how to speak to them in that calm, quiet way that kept them relaxed. Katherine had never worked so hard in her life, and she loved every minute of it. By the end of the day, she was filthy and sore and happier than she had been in months. Ethan drove her home again, and they talked easily during the ride, about the horses and the ranch and small things that made each other laugh. It became their routine. Every Saturday, Ethan would pick Katherine up after completing his shopping in town, and they would spend the day working together at the ranch. Sometimes Louise would pack Katherine a lunch to share with Ethan, and they would eat sitting on the porch of the ranch house, looking out over the land while the horses grazed in the pasture. During those lunch breaks, they talked about everything. Ethan told her about his childhood, growing up on the ranch with parents who had loved each other deeply and taught him to respect the land and the animals. Katherine told him about Boston, about her life there, and eventually, haltingly, about Robert and the betrayal that had sent her fleeing west. "He was a fool," Ethan said quietly when she finished. "Anyone who would choose someone else over you is a damned fool." Katherine felt heat rise in her face, but she managed to say, "You do not know me well enough to say that." "I know you are kind to skittish horses," Ethan replied. "I know you work hard without complaining even when I can see you are exhausted. I know you left everything you knew to start over somewhere completely foreign, and you are brave enough to actually try building a new life instead of just giving up. That tells me everything I need to know." "You see me very generously," Katherine said, her throat tight. "I see you clearly," Ethan corrected. "Maybe for the first time in your life, someone is actually seeing you clearly." Katherine did not know how to respond to that, so she just sat in silence, feeling something shift inside her chest like pieces of a broken thing slowly knitting back together. As June turned into July, Catherine's life in Guthrie felt less like exile and more like home. She enjoyed her teaching, watching the children's progress with genuine pride. She loved her Saturday work sessions at the ranch, where she and Ethan fell into an easy rhythm of companionship and shared labor. The wild mustangs were slowly gentling under Ethan's patient handling, and Catherine felt a thrill of accomplishment when the first one finally accepted a halter without fight. But underlying everything was her growing awareness that what she felt for Ethan had moved far beyond friendship. She found herself thinking about him constantly, remembering the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the sound of his laugh, the strength in his hands, the kindness in his voice. She caught herself watching him when he did not know she was looking, memorizing the way he moved, the line of his shoulders, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he bent to work. She was falling in love with him, and the realization terrified her. How could she trust her heart again after what had happened with Robert? How did she know this was real and not just gratitude to the first person who had shown her genuine kindness in Guthrie? And worse, what if Ethan did not feel the same way? She could not bear to lose what they had built, the friendship and working partnership that had become the best part of her week. One Saturday in mid-July, they were working in the barn together when a sudden summer storm blew up out of nowhere. One minute, the sky was clear and bright. The next, dark clouds raced across the prairie and rain began falling in sheets. They ran for the barn, but both got soaked in the few seconds it took to reach shelter. Inside the barn, Catherine stood dripping and laughing, her wet clothes clinging to her body, her braid a soggy rope down her back. Ethan was equally drenched, his shirt plastered to his chest, water dripping from his hair. They looked at each other and started laughing harder, the sheer absurdity of being caught so completely off guard. "So much for checking that fence line," Ethan said, wringing water from his shirt. "I suppose we could stay here until it passes," Catherine suggested, looking out at the downpour. "Could be a while," Ethan said. "These summer storms sometimes last hours." They found relatively dry hay bales to sit on and settled in to wait. The rain pounded on the barn roof, a steady drumming that created a cocoon of sound around them. The horses in their stalls shifted and nickered softly, unbothered by the storm. "I love this sound," Catherine said after a while. "Rain on a roof." "We got rain in Boston, of course, but it was different somehow." "Everything is different here," Ethan said. "I have never been anywhere else, but people who come from back east all say the same thing. Bigger sky, bigger weather, bigger everything. Bigger possibilities," Catherine added softly. Ethan looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Catherine, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "All right. These past few months, having you here working with me, it has been the best thing that has happened to me in longer than I can remember. I was so alone before you came, and I had convinced myself that being alone was just how my life was going to be. But now I cannot imagine going back to that. I do not want to go back to that." Catherine could hardly breathe. "Ethan, let me finish," he said, his voice rough. "I know you came here running from something. I know you got hurt back in Boston and you probably are not ready for this. But I have to tell you anyway because I am not good at pretending and you deserve honesty. Catherine, I am in love with you. I think I have been since that first day I saw you on the platform, crying with your whole heart broken, and all I wanted was to tell you that you would be all right, that you were home now." Tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks, mixing with the rain water still on her face. "You cannot love me," she whispered. "You barely know me." "I know you," Ethan said firmly. I know you in all the ways that matter. I know your kindness and your courage and your determination. I know the way you sing to the horses when you think I am not listening. I know how you bite your lip when you are concentrating on something difficult. I know that you take your coffee with too much sugar and you are afraid of chickens, and you have the most beautiful laugh I have ever heard. I know you, Katherine Eleanor, and I love you. If you do not feel the same way, I understand, and we can forget I said anything and just keep being friends. But I had to tell you. I had to. Katherine was crying in earnest now, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief and joy and overwhelming emotion that she could not contain. "You foolish man," she said, her voice breaking. "Of course I feel the same way. I have been falling in love with you for months and trying so hard not to because I was terrified of being hurt again." Ethan stood from his hay bale and crossed the space between them in 2 strides. He cupped her face in his work-roughened hands and looked into her eyes with such intensity that she felt it all the way to her soul. "I will never hurt you," he said fiercely. "I swear to you, Katherine, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never have cause to cry like you were crying that day on the platform. You are home now. You are home with me, and I will keep you safe." Then he kissed her, and Katherine felt the last broken pieces inside her click into place. His lips were gentle at first, tentative, but when she responded, threading her fingers into his wet hair and pulling him closer, the kiss deepened. It was nothing like the chaste kisses she had shared with Robert. This was fire and need and a connection so profound it shook her to her core. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I do not have much to offer you," he said quietly. "Just a struggling ranch and a house that needs work, and a life that is going to be filled with hard days and dirt and constant worry about money and weather, and 1,000 other things. But I can promise you love, Katherine. I can promise you that every single day for the rest of our lives, I will love you with everything I have." "That is all I need," Katherine said. "That is everything I need. I do not want an easy life, Ethan. I want a real one. I want this with you, whatever it looks like." They stayed in the barn until the storm passed, talking and kissing and making plans for a future that was just beginning to take shape. By the time the rain stopped and the sun emerged to paint the wet prairie gold, Katherine felt like a different person than the broken woman who had stepped off that train 2 months ago. That woman had been lost and hurting and convinced her life was over. This woman, held safe in Ethan Quincy's arms, knew that her life was just beginning. The rest of that summer passed in a blur of joy. Ethan courted Katherine properly, coming into town on Sundays after church to take her on walks or picnics, always with Louise as a chaperone to protect Katherine's reputation. But Saturdays remained their special day, when Katherine would go to the ranch, and they would work side by side and steal kisses in the barn when no one was watching. In August, Ethan asked Katherine to marry him while they stood watching the sunset from the ranch house porch. He did not have a ring yet, apologizing that he would need to save up for one, but Katherine did not care. She said yes through happy tears and kissed him as the sky turned crimson and gold above them. They were married in September, in the little church in Guthrie with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Katherine wore a dress that Mrs. Davis had made, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and carried wildflowers that Ethan had picked that morning. Louise cried through the whole ceremony. Ethan's voice shook as he said his vows, promising to love and cherish Katherine for all of his days, and Katherine's was steady as she promised the same. The reception was held at Louise's house, with food contributed by half the women in town and music, provided by Katherine's students from the school. It was nothing like the elaborate wedding Katherine had once imagined in Boston, with hundreds of guests and an orchestra and a reception at the finest hotel. It was better. It was real people who genuinely cared about them, celebrating their union with honest joy. As the sun set on her wedding day, Ethan drove Katherine out to the ranch in the wagon, now officially her home. He carried her over the threshold of the little house, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Quincy," he said softly. "Home," Katherine repeated, looking around at the simple furnishings, the stone fireplace, the windows that looked out over the land. "Yes, this is home." Their first months of marriage were an adjustment, learning to live together, to share space and make decisions as partners. Katherine had to learn to cook more substantial meals than she had made with Louise, to manage a household with limited resources, to be alone for long stretches when Ethan was working distant parts of the ranch. Ethan had to learn to share his life after years of solitude, to talk about his day and his worries instead of keeping everything inside, to accept help and partnership instead of always trying to handle everything alone. But they were happy. Despite the hard work and the constant financial strain and the isolation of ranch life, they were deeply, profoundly happy. Ethan came alive under Katherine's love, the sadness that had haunted his eyes replaced by laughter. Katherine bloomed in the freedom of her new life, discovering strengths she had never known she possessed. In October, they finished training the last of the wild Mustangs, and Ethan delivered them to the Army fort and collected payment that would see them through the winter. In November, Katherine discovered she was pregnant, and Ethan's joy was so overwhelming he literally swept her off her feet and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing and begging him to put her down. Winter came, and Katherine experienced her first Oklahoma blizzard. For 3 days, snow fell so heavily they could not see the barn from the house, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze solid within minutes of being drawn from the well. They stayed inside, keeping the fire burning constantly, and Ethan told Katherine stories about his childhood while she worked on sewing baby clothes. The isolation that might have felt oppressive instead felt cozy, the two of them snug and warm while the storm raged outside. When spring returned, Katherine's pregnancy was showing clearly, and Ethan was comically protective, trying to take over all her chores and fretting any time she exerted herself. Katherine mostly found it endearing, though she had to firmly insist that she was pregnant, not ill, and perfectly capable of continuing to help around the ranch. In May of 1886, after a labor that lasted most of a day and left Ethan pacing frantically, while Louise attended Katherine, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's auburn hair. They named him James, after Ethan's father, and Ethan held his son with such wonder and tenderness that Katherine fell in love with him all over again. Being parents was exhausting and challenging and wonderful. Little James was a loud baby who rarely slept and seemed to need constant attention, but every smile, every tiny sound, every milestone felt like a miracle. Ethan proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with James when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, singing the lullabies his own mother had sung to him. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Word spread about Ethan's skill with difficult horses, and more customers came seeking his services. Katherine continued teaching music in town 2 days a week, bringing James with her, and the income helped. They hired a young man named Thomas to help with the heavy labor, taking some of the burden off Ethan's shoulders. 2 years after James's birth, Katherine had a daughter they named Elizabeth Louise, after Katherine's mother and aunt. Where James was loud and energetic, Elizabeth was quiet and observant, watching the world with serious eyes. 2 years after that came another son, Robert. Katherine had insisted on the name, telling Ethan that she wanted to reclaim it, to make it mean something good and joyful instead of painful. The house expanded as the family grew, with Ethan and Thomas building on 2 more bedrooms and a proper kitchen. The ranch buildings got fresh paint, new fences went up, the herd of horses increased. It was never easy. There were years when drought killed the grass and they struggled to feed the animals. There were hard winters and unexpected expenses and times when money was so tight Katherine could not see how they would make it through. But they always did, together. When Katherine was 28 and Ethan 30, they stood on their porch one evening watching their 3 children play in the yard. James, at 6, was explaining something earnestly to his 4-year-old sister, while 2-year-old Robert toddled between them. "You ever regret it?" Ethan asked quietly. "Giving up your life in Boston for this?" Katherine looked at him in genuine surprise. "Not for a single moment. How could I regret finding you?" "It is not the life you were raised for," Ethan said. "It is harder than anything you experienced in Boston." "It is also more real than anything I experienced there," Katherine replied. "More meaningful. In Boston, I was playing a role, being who everyone expected me to be. Here, I am actually myself. I am actually living, Ethan. Do you regret it?" "Marrying me, taking on responsibility for a wife and children when you could have had your freedom, Katherine Eleanor Quincy. You are my freedom," Ethan said, pulling her close. "Before you, I was trapped in loneliness and grief. You saved me. You and these children, you are everything." "We saved each other," Katherine corrected, leaning into his embrace. "That train brought me here in tears, so lost and broken, and you whispered that I was home now. You were right, Ethan. This is home. You are home." They stood together on the porch of the house they had built, watching their children play in the last light of day, and Katherine thought about that terrified woman who had stepped off the train in Guthrie 5 years ago. She had come running from heartbreak, convinced her life was over. Instead, she had found a life beyond anything she could have imagined. A love that was real and deep and enduring. A partnership that made both of them stronger. Children who filled their days with chaos and joy. A home that was truly hers in a way the elegant house in Boston never had been. Years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and family. The children grew, each developing their own personality and interests. James was fascinated by the horses, following Ethan everywhere and learning his father's patient methods of training. Elizabeth loved music, and Katherine taught her to play the old piano that Ethan had surprised her with one Christmas, hauled all the way from Tulsa. Robert was the dreamer, spending hours watching clouds and telling elaborate stories about where they might be going. Louise remained an important part of their lives, visiting often and maintaining her close relationship with Katherine. As she aged, she eventually moved into a small room they added to the house, becoming a beloved grandmother figure to the children and an extra pair of hands that Katherine desperately needed. When Katherine was 35, Louise passed away peacefully in her sleep. The loss hit Katherine hard, this aunt who had taken her in when she was broken and helped her build a new life. At the funeral, Katherine spoke about how Louise had taught her that it was never too late to reinvent yourself, to find purpose and joy in unexpected places. The entire town turned out, testament to the impact Louise had made in Guthrie. That same year brought another challenge when a drought struck the territory. For months, no rain fell, and the prairie turned brown and brittle. The creek that ran through the ranch property dried to a trickle. Ethan and Thomas had to haul water from town for the animals, exhausting work that left both men gaunt with fatigue. Katherine rationed everything, stretching their supplies and their money as far as possible. There were nights when Katherine lay awake worrying that they might lose everything. But Ethan never lost faith. "We will make it through," he told her with quiet certainty. "We have weathered storms before. We will weather this one too." And they did. The rains finally came in September, and though they had lost some horses and used up all their savings, the ranch survived. The experience left them even more grateful for what they had and even more determined to protect it. The children continued to grow. James, at 16, was nearly as tall as his father and just as skilled with horses. He talked about maybe starting his own ranch someday, and Ethan began setting aside a portion of their land for him. Elizabeth, at 14, had developed into an accomplished musician, playing piano at church services and teaching younger children. Robert, at 12, announced his intention to become a writer, filling journal after journal with his observations and stories. One evening when Katherine was 40, she and Ethan sat on their porch as they had done countless times before, watching the sunset paint the prairie gold and crimson. The children were inside, James helping Elizabeth with mathematics while Robert read aloud from his latest story. "You remember the day we met?" Katherine asked, her hand in Ethan's. "On the platform," Ethan replied. "Of course. You were crying, looking so lost. I wanted to go to you, but I did not know what to say." "Not then," Katherine said. "Well, yes, I suppose that was the first time you saw me, but the day we really met, when I nearly ran into you outside the general store. You looked at me like you were seeing a ghost," Ethan said with a smile. "Scared me half to death." "I was seeing something," Katherine said thoughtfully. "I think maybe I was seeing my future, though I did not know it yet. Some part of me recognized you, Ethan, recognized that you were important, that you were going to change everything." "Funny," Ethan said. "I felt the same way, like I had been waiting for you without knowing I was waiting." "Do you think we would have found each other if I had not come to Guthrie?" Katherine asked. "If Robert had not betrayed me, if I had married him instead?" "I do not know," Ethan admitted. "But I am grateful every single day that things happened the way they did. I am grateful for that train that brought you here, grateful for whatever circumstances led you to my stable that day, grateful for every moment since." Katherine leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to think my life was over when I got on that train. Now I realize it was just beginning. Everything before was just preparation for this, for you, for our family, for this life we have built together." "You have given me everything," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "A family, a purpose, a reason to wake up every morning grateful to be alive. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. Now I am living, Katherine. You taught me how to live again." "We taught each other," Katherine said, the phrase an echo of one she had spoken years ago. "That is what love does. It teaches us who we really are and who we can become." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the sound of their children's laughter, Elizabeth playing something on the piano, James and Robert arguing good-naturedly about something. It was the sound of home, Katherine thought. The sound of a life well lived. More years passed. James married at 22, a sweet girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, and they built a small house on the portion of Quincy land that Ethan had set aside for him. Within a year, they had a son, making Katherine and Ethan grandparents. Holding that tiny baby, Katherine was overwhelmed by the realization that she and Ethan had created not just a family but a legacy. Elizabeth, at 20, announced her intention to attend the new Teachers College in Tulsa, wanting to become a formal music teacher. Both Katherine and Ethan supported her decision, though saying goodbye when she left was difficult. She wrote long letters home about her studies and her new experiences, and Katherine saved everyone. Robert, at 18, got a job at the Guthrie newspaper, writing small articles and dreaming of someday publishing a novel. He moved into town to be closer to work, but came home for Sunday dinners every week without fail. When Katherine was 50, a new railroad line came through Guthrie, connecting them more directly to larger cities. The town experienced another boom of growth, with new businesses opening and more families arriving. The wildness of the early territorial days was fading, replaced by something more settled and civilized. Oklahoma would achieve statehood in 1907, a momentous change that Katherine and Ethan celebrated along with everyone else. But through all the changes, their love remained constant. Ethan still looked at Katherine with the same wonder and devotion he had shown that day in the barn when he first told her he loved her. Katherine still felt her heart skip when she saw him walking across the yard toward the house, older now and moving more slowly, but still strong and capable. They faced challenges together, the way they always had. A bad fall from a horse left Ethan with a leg that never quite healed right, giving him a permanent limp. Katherine developed arthritis in her hands that made playing piano painful. But these were small prices to pay for the life they had shared, the years of partnership and love and building something meaningful together. One spring evening when Katherine was 55 and Ethan 60, they hosted a gathering at the ranch to celebrate their 30th wedding anniversary. All three of their children were there with their families, James and Sarah with their 3 children. Elizabeth, now married to a music professor from Tulsa, expecting her first child. Robert with his new wife, a fellow writer he had met in the city. The house and yard were full of people and noise and laughter. After dinner, Ethan called for quiet and took Katherine's hand, leading her to the center of the room. 30 years ago, he said, his voice carrying clearly, I was the loneliest man in Oklahoma Territory. I had convinced myself that I would spend my life alone, that I did not deserve or need anything more than work and solitude. Then a train brought a woman from Boston, crying like her heart was broken, and everything changed. Katherine felt tears gathering in her eyes as Ethan continued. Katherine Eleanor, you saved my life. You taught me how to love and be loved. You gave me a family and a home that is more than just buildings and land. You have been my partner, my best friend, my greatest blessing. These 30 years with you have been the best years of my existence, and if I had 30 more, it would not be enough. I love you today as much as I loved you that day in the barn when I first told you. More, even, because now I know what we are capable of building together. Katherine could not speak through her tears, so she just pulled Ethan close and kissed him while their children and grandchildren applauded and cheered. Looking around at the faces of the people they loved, at the home they had built, at the life they had created together, Katherine felt overwhelming gratitude. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, Katherine and Ethan walked out to the porch one last time. The stars blazed overhead in the clear prairie sky, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of grass and wildflowers. You remember what you told me that day at church? Katherine asked. You said maybe I belonged here, that maybe that was why I came. I remember, Ethan said. Did I turn out to be right? You were exactly right, Katherine replied. I belonged here all along. I just had to take that train to find out. I had to let my heart break so it could be put back together the right way with you. The train brought you from Boston in tears, Ethan said softly, pulling her close. And I whispered that you were home now, city girl. I meant it then and I mean it now. You are home, Katherine. You have always been home, right here with me. Always, Katherine agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. And forever. They stood together on the porch of the house they had built, looking out over the land they had tended for 3 decades, and Katherine Eleanor Quincy knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The frightened, heartbroken woman who had stepped off that train so many years ago felt like a different person, someone from another lifetime. That woman had been lost, but she had been found. She had been broken, but she had been healed. She had been alone, but she had found the love of her life in the most unexpected place. The Oklahoma prairie stretched endlessly before them, dark beneath the stars, full of promise and possibility. Somewhere out there, Katherine knew, other trains were carrying other people toward their destinies, toward heartbreak or healing or both. But here, in this moment, on this porch with this man who had shown her what true love looked like, Katherine Eleanor Quincy was complete. The years that followed brought all the changes that time inevitably brings. Ethan's hair turned silver, then white, and his strong body slowly weakened. Katherine's hands grew too arthritic for piano playing, though she still taught music theory to eager students. They moved more slowly, tired more easily, spent more evenings on the porch and fewer days working the ranch as James took over more of the daily operations. But their love never faltered. In fact, it deepened with time, becoming something even more profound than the passionate romance of their early years. They had weathered every storm together, celebrated every joy together, built an entire life together from nothing but hope and hard work and unwavering commitment to each other. When Katherine was 68 and Ethan 73, he woke one morning unable to get out of bed. The doctor came from town and diagnosed heart failure, telling Katherine gently that there was nothing to be done. Ethan had maybe weeks, possibly only days. Their children gathered at the ranch, bringing the grandchildren, filling the house with family. But when evening came, Katherine insisted on time alone with her husband. She sat beside his bed, holding his hand, and they talked quietly about everything and nothing. "I am not afraid," Ethan said, his voice weak but steady. "I have lived a good life, Katherine, the best life, because of you. You cannot leave me," Katherine said, tears streaming down her face. "I do not know how to be without you." "You are the strongest person I have ever known," Ethan replied. "You will be fine. And Katherine, I will wait for you. However long it takes, I will be waiting when you cross over." "Promise me," Katherine whispered. "I promise," Ethan said. "You are my home, Katherine Eleanor. In this life and whatever comes next, you are my home." He passed 3 days later, on a warm September evening with Katherine holding his hand and his children gathered around his bed. His last word was her name, spoken so softly she almost missed it, and then he was gone. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that left Katherine gasping. For 50 years, Ethan had been the center of her world, her partner in everything, the love of her life. Without him, she felt untethered, lost in a way she had not felt since those first terrible days in Guthrie so long ago. But she had responsibilities, people who needed her. She had children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who were grieving too. She had a ranch that Ethan had loved and worked his whole life to build. So Katherine did what she had always done when faced with hardship. She got up every morning, put one foot in front of the other, and kept going. The months after Ethan's death were the hardest of Katherine's life. Everything reminded her of him. The porch where they had spent countless evenings. The barn where he had first told her he loved her. The land they had worked together. Even her own body, aged and arthritic, reminded her of him because he had been there through every change, every year, loving her just the same. But slowly, gradually, the sharp pain of grief softened into something more bearable. Katherine found comfort in her family, in her memories, in the knowledge that she had been loved completely and had loved just as completely in return. Not everyone got that, she knew. Not everyone found the kind of love she and Ethan had shared. She continued teaching music, finding purpose in passing on knowledge to another generation. She wrote long letters to her children and grandchildren, filling pages with stories about Ethan, about their life together, about the history of the ranch and the family. She wanted to make sure their legacy was remembered, that future generations would know the love story that had built their family. On what would have been their 55th wedding anniversary, Katherine stood alone on the porch at sunset, looking out over the prairie. She was 80 years old now, her body frail and her hair completely white, but her mind was still sharp and her heart still full of love for the man who was gone. "I miss you," she whispered into the wind. "Every moment of every day I miss you, but I am still here, Ethan. I am still living our life, taking care of our family, loving this place that we built together. And when my time comes, I will find you. I believe that. I have to believe that." The wind seemed to carry her words across the prairie, and Katherine could almost hear Ethan's response, that gentle voice saying the same words he had spoken so many years ago. "You are home now. You are home." Katherine lived 2 more years after Ethan's passing. She spent them surrounded by family, teaching her great-grandchildren the same lessons about love and perseverance and courage that life had taught her. She told them the story of how a train had brought her from Boston in tears, how a lonely cowboy had shown her that home was not a place but a person, that love could heal even the deepest wounds. She passed away peacefully in her sleep on a spring morning, the windows opened to let in the breeze that carried the scent of prairie grass and wildflowers. Her children found her with a smile on her face, as if she had seen something wonderful in her last moments. At her funeral, which packed the church in Guthrie to overflowing, her son Robert read a piece he had written about his parents. He spoke of their love story, of how 2 broken people had found each other and built something beautiful together. He talked about the lessons they had taught through their example, about partnership and perseverance and the transformative power of love. "My father once told me," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion, "that my mother had saved his life. And my mother told me that my father had shown her what home meant. But I think the truth is that they saved each other. They created a home together, not just in buildings and land but in their hearts. And that home, that love, is their legacy to all of us." Katherine Eleanor Quincy was buried beside Ethan on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Under the vast Oklahoma sky they had both loved. On the shared headstone, their children had carved both their names and dates, and beneath that, a simple inscription. "The train brought her from Boston in tears. He whispered she was home now, and she was." The ranch continued under James's care, and then his son's care, passing down through generations as Ethan and Katherine had hoped. The house expanded again to accommodate growing families, but the original structure remained, preserved as a reminder of where everything had begun. The porch where Katherine and Ethan had spent so many evenings became a favorite gathering place for the family, and countless children learned to love the prairie sunset from that spot. The story of Katherine and Ethan became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. Future generations heard about the heartbroken woman from Boston who had traveled west seeking escape and found instead the love of her life. They heard about the lonely cowboy who had whispered the words that changed everything. They learned that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best. That home is not where you come from but where you are loved. That true love can heal any wound and weather any storm. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the Oklahoma prairie and the sky turned gold with sunset, some family members swore they could see 2 figures on that old porch. A tall man with blue eyes and a woman with auburn hair, standing together as they had for 50 years, looking out over the land they loved. Ghosts, perhaps, or memories, or simply the lingering presence of a love so strong it could not be contained even by death. The train had brought her from Boston in tears, a broken woman fleeing scandal and heartbreak. A lonely cowboy had whispered that she was home now, offering comfort to a stranger. And from that simple moment of kindness, from that connection between two damaged souls, had grown a love that built a family, sustained a ranch, and proved that sometimes the end of one dream is simply the beginning of another, better dream. Katherine and Ethan's story was not one of easy perfection or effortless romance. It was a story of hard work and harder times, of struggles overcome and challenges faced together. It was a story of two people who chose each other every single day, who built a life from nothing but determination and love, who proved that home is not a place you find, but something you create with the person you love. And that story, that love, lived on long after they were gone, in the land they had tended, the family they had raised, and the legacy they had built together. The train had brought her west in tears, but she had found joy. The cowboy had been lonely, but he had found love. And together, they had found home,